He bought his secret daughter a $12,000 show pony for her 10th birthday using the home equity line of credit secured against the house I inherited from my parents. I didn't cry. I took action. 72 hours later, his meticulously constructed double life collapsed entirely, and he never saw it coming. My name is Clara. For 8 years, I was married to a man named Julian. To the outside world, Julian was the quintessential family man. He was an executive consultant for a mid-tier pharmaceutical supply chain, a title that came with a 6-figure salary, tailored suits, and a punishing travel schedule. We lived in an affluent suburb of Chicago, the kind of place where lawns are manicured by landscaping companies and neighbors smile at you while silently judging the make of your C.R. We had one son, Leo, who was 7 at the time everything unraveled. Julian was charismatic. It is the first word people used to describe him, and it is the word that kept me trapped for the better part of a decade. Charisma is a dangerous currency because it covers a multitude of sins. When Julian forgot our anniversary because he was stuck in a layover in Denver, his apologies were so lavish, so seemingly genuine, that you felt guilty for being angry. When he missed Leo's kindergarten graduation, he showed up the next day with a limited edition Lego set and a breathless story about a board meeting that ran late. He was always the hero of his own apologies. Over the years, his absences grew longer. A 3-day trip stretched into 5. A weekend at home became a series of distracted hours spent scrolling on his phone, snapping at Leo for making too much noise, and retreating to his home office to take urgent offs or calls. I started to feel a constant, low-level thrum of anxiety. I would ask him about the gaps in his stories, the unexplained ATM withdrawals, the hotel receipts from cities that weren't on his official itinerary. This is where the gaslighting began. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle, insidious, and devastatingly effective. He would look at me with soft, concerned eyes and ask if I was feeling okay. He would remind me that I had been stressed lately, that my memory was playing tricks on me, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto his thriving career. "Clara, I'm doing all of this for us," he would say, his hand resting warmly on my shoulder. "Do you think I want to be in a Marriott in Dallas instead of here with you and Leo? You need to stop manufacturing problems where there are none." I swallowed it. I swallowed the humiliation of feeling like a paranoid, ungrateful wife. I silenced my instincts to keep the peace in our home. I convinced myself that the coldness in his eyes was just fatigue, and that his aggressive defensiveness was the natural byproduct of a high-stress job. I played the role of the supportive partner, managing the household, raising our son, and maintaining the pristine facade of our marriage. I smiled warmly at his corporate dinners, making polite conversation with his colleagues while pushing down the nausea of knowing something was fundamentally wrong. I did everything right, never realizing the game was rigged from the very beginning. Julian was obsessed with financial control. He insisted on managing our primary accounts, claiming he had a better grasp on investment strategies. He gave me a generous household allowance, but the core architecture of our wealth was entirely in his hands. He was particularly adamant about life insurance. 3 years into our marriage, he took out an astronomical policy. He told me it was a sophisticated whole-life investment vehicle, heavily front-loaded with cash value, designed to secure our retirement and Leo's future. He had me sign a stack of documents in a rush one morning before he dashed off to the airport. I trusted him. That was my first and nearly my last fatal error. What I didn't know then was that Julian had another life. Not a casual affair, a parallel existence. He had a woman named Sarah living in a sprawling townhouse in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had a daughter with her, a daughter who was 2 years older than Leo. She was his true priority, the child he paraded around his second set of friends, the golden child who received the best of his time, his affection, his energy, and our money. I was just the placeholder, the respectable, stable wife who maintained the primary residence, paid the local property taxes, and provided the legitimate legal cover for his extensive financial maneuvers. He was living a fully funded fantasy, and I was the one secretly footing the bill. It is terrifying how easily you can lose yourself when you are constantly told that your reality is flawed. You stop trusting your own senses. You start filtering every single thought through the lens of how the other person will react. You tell yourself that the knot in your stomach is just anxiety, not intuition. The psychological toll of living in a state of suspended reality is exhausting. Narcissists rely on this exhaustion. They use your empathy as a weapon against you, draining your energy so you don't have the strength to look too closely at the cracks in their stories. You rationalize their behavior because facing the truth means dismantling your entire life. Keeping the peace is just a polite name for slow self-destruction. You adjust your boundaries until they disappear entirely, sacrificing your sanity to maintain an illusion that only benefits your abuser. But truth has a way of surfacing, usually when the architect of the lie gets incredibly sloppy. Julian got sloppy. It was a cold Tuesday evening in late October. Julian was supposedly in Seattle for a week-long leadership conference. Leo was fast asleep in his room down the hall. I was in Julian's home office, looking for our son's social security card for a mandatory school enrollment form. I opened the bottom drawer of his heavy oak filing cabinet, the one he always meticulously kept locked. He had accidentally left the spare key in the top desk drawer. A minor oversight. A brief lapse in his usually flawless security protocol. An imperfect detail that would eventually destroy him. Inside the drawer, beneath a stack of old tax returns, was a thick manila envelope from a boutique wealth management firm in Arizona. I opened it. Inside were the recent statements for the life insurance policy he had rushed me into signing years ago. I began to read the beneficiaries, the recent massive withdrawals, the address listed for correspondence. The words blurred, then snapped into sharp, agonizing focus. What I found inside that folder changed everything I thought I knew about the past 7 years. What I have told you so far is how he broke me down, piece by piece. What comes next is how I built a trap he could never escape. Sitting on the floor of his home office with that manila envelope in my hands, my blood ran cold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just read. The documents were a masterclass in financial deception, but they contained one fatal, arrogant flaw. Julian had taken out a $5 million whole life insurance policy. He had been funneling nearly all of his annual corporate bonuses into it, heavily overfunding the cash value for years. He had also used it to quietly launder the $75,000 he originally took from our home equity line of credit. He had been systematically taking unrecorded loans against this massive cash pool to pay for the luxury townhouse in Scottsdale, the expensive show pony for his secret daughter, and a lavish secondary lifestyle I was completely excluded from. But Julian, in his infinite arrogance, wanted to meticulously protect this massive hidden asset from potential corporate liability lawsuits related to his high-risk pharmaceutical consulting. To shield it, he made me the legal owner of the policy. He was the insured person. I was the owner. He had been forging my signature on the withdrawal requests for 3 years. He assumed I was too docile, too thoroughly broken by his relentless gaslighting, to ever dare look inside his locked filing drawer. He underestimated me. The emotional temperature in my body dropped to absolute zero. The crushing anxiety that had plagued me for years evaporated instantly, replaced by a terrifying, crystalline clarity. I carefully photographed every single page using a secure scanner application on my phone. I placed the documents back exactly as I found them, down to the millimeter. I locked the drawer. I put the spare key back in his desk. Then, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice-cold water, and began to plot his absolute, irrevocable ruin. The next morning, while Julian was still supposedly attending his leadership conference in Seattle, a conference I now knew was a disguised trip to Arizona, I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled office of the most ruthless family law attorney in Chicago. Her name was Evelyn. I didn't walk into her office with tissues and tears. I walked in with a heavy, organized binder. Let me be very clear about something. Financial abuse is still abuse, and it leaves evidence. The catastrophic mistake people make is confronting their abuser with emotions instead of evidence. You cannot reason with someone who actively benefits from misunderstanding you. If you ever find yourself in this situation, understand that a paper trail is your only lifeline. You don't build it after the fight starts. You build it in the cold silence before the war. Bank statements, forged signatures, property deeds, LLC registrations, these are the undeniable weapons of reality. Gather them quietly. Store them safely. A document signed before the conflict is basic self-preservation. Evelyn carefully examined the high-resolution photographs of the insurance policy and smiled a slow, genuinely dangerous smile. She looked up at me over her glasses. "Clara," she said quietly, "as the legal policy owner, you have unilateral control. You can change the beneficiary today. You can surrender the policy today. You can drain the entire cash value right now, legally, and transfer it to a secure account in your name alone." He handed you the keys to his own destruction. I immediately authorized Evelyn to begin the quiet extraction. It wasn't movie perfect. The insurance company required a mandatory 48-hour hold on the transfer due to the massive size of the cash withdrawal. I spent 2 agonizing days absolutely terrified he would log into the portal and check his balance. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart slammed painfully against my ribs. I barely slept, but he didn't check. He was too busy buying his secret daughter that $12,000 pony. I was systematically dismantling his empire in Chicago. I revoked his legal access to my inherited property. I opened a new, impenetrable trust for my son, Leo. When the hold finally cleared, I legally executed a full withdrawal of the policy's accumulated cash value nearly $800,000 and transferred it into an offshore account Julian didn't even know existed. I changed the beneficiary from his secret trust in Arizona to a charity for abandoned animals, just out of pure spite. I thought neutralizing his secret slush fund would be the most satisfying part of this process. I was wrong, because what I uncovered next required a completely different kind of revenge. Evelyn's forensic accountant dug deeper into the Arizona townhouse. Julian hadn't just bought a house for Sarah. He had purchased it under a commercial LLC. And who was listed as the primary guarantor for the mortgage of that LLC? I was. He had blatantly forged my signature on federal mortgage documents, tying my personal credit to his mistress's luxury home. If he ever stopped paying, the bank would come for my house. My parents' house. The sheer audacity of this man was staggering. He wasn't just living a double life. He was forcing me to underwrite the financial risk of his infidelity. By Friday afternoon, the traps were fully set. The cash was completely gone. The mortgage fraud had been reported anonymously to the federal lender, triggering an automatic, silent audit of his LLC. The divorce papers were drafted, demanding full custody of Leo and citing egregious financial fraud, which in the state of Illinois destroys any chance of an equitable split for he offending spouse. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front door opened. Julian walked in, dropping his designer leather duffel bag in the foyer. He looked perfectly tanned, sporting a slight sunburn on his nose that you simply don't get in rainy Seattle. He smiled that charismatic, camera-ready smile that had fooled me for a decade. "Hey, babe," he called out cheerfully, his voice echoing in the hallway. "I missed you guys." The conference was brutal. I was sitting perfectly still in the living room chair. I didn't get up to greet him. I kept my voice steady, betraying absolutely nothing. "Did you learn a lot?" I asked. He walks toward me, ready to spin another web of beautiful lies, completely unaware that his accounts were entirely empty, his federal fraud was exposed, and the quiet woman city, Ng silently in front of him was legally no longer his compliant wife. But he was about to give me the absolute perfect opening, and I was going to let him dig his own grave before I finally pushed him in. The trap was fully set. Now it was time to watch him walk into it. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, were due to drop Leo off from his Friday afternoon piano lesson in exactly 10 minutes. Julian loved his parents. To them, he was the golden child, the flawless son who could do no wrong. They had spent years subtly implying that I was incredibly lucky to have landed a man of his caliber. I needed them in the room. Not for dramatic effect, but because narcissists rely entirely on isolation and controlled narratives. You break their power by turning on the lights when they least expect it. "Did you learn a lot?" I asked him, my voice perfectly level. Julian poured himself a generous glass of expensive scotch, completely unbothered. He smiled warmly at me, playing the exhausted but dedicated provider. "It was brutal, Clara," he sighed, swirling the amber liquid. "Endless strategy sessions. But I'm doing all of this for us, you know that. I'm just glad to be home so we can finally relax." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move from my chair. I just slid the thick, black binder across the polished mahogany coffee table until it stopped exactly in front of his drink. Inside were the clear prints of the life insurance policy, the empty cash value statement from that morning, and the federal mortgage documents for the Arizona townhouse bearing my blatantly forged signature. Julian opened the cover, expecting perhaps a passive-aggressive household budget or a printed list of his recent absences. His eyes scanned the first page. He didn't scream or throw his glass. His reaction was a masterclass in sudden, catastrophic system failure. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill, his jaw locking as he flipped to the second page, then the third, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. He stared at the zero balance on the policy, his mind violently struggling to process that his untouchable safety net was completely, irrevocably gone. His hand was shaking so badly he knocked over his scotch, the amber liquid staining the edges of the mortgage deed. But I didn't try to wipe it up. Just then, the front door opened and his parents walked in with Leo. I immediately signaled our nanny, who had been waiting in the foyer, to take Leo straight upstairs. Richard and Eleanor walked into the living room, freezing when they saw Julian standing over the spilled scotch, gripping the wet documents like a lifeline. His mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while his father stood utterly frozen, staring at the undeniable proof of his golden child's felony fraud. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Your secret account is empty, Julian, and your federal audit starts Monday. For a long, agonizing minute, nobody spoke. The room went dead silent. Then, the survival instincts of a cornered liar kicked in. Julian slammed the binder shut. Clara, what the hell is this? He stammered, his voice pitching up in panic. You hacked my private files? You stole my money? Mom, Dad, she's having a psychotic break. I told you she's been unstable. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to regain control of the room, relying on the same gaslighting he had used for years. But evidence doesn't care about your charisma. I am the legal owner of that policy, Julian, I said clearly. I cannot steal what I legally own, and I cannot forge my own signature on a commercial loan for a townhouse in Scottsdale where your mistress and your other daughter live. But you can. And you did. Eleanor collapsed into the nearest armchair, clutching her chest. Other daughter? She whispered, the illusion of her perfect family shattering in real time. Richard turned to Julian, demanding an explanation, but Julian had nothing left. He was suffocating under the weight of his own hubris. I thought I was ready for that moment. I wasn't, not entirely. Watching a man I had loved for a decade completely disintegrate in front of his parents brought a sudden, unexpected wave of nausea. My hands felt cold, and for a split second, the heavy, familiar urge to comfort him, to manage his anxiety, flared up in my chest. That is the insidious nature of long-term psychological conditioning. But I forced myself to stay completely still, gripping the armrests of my chair until my knuckles turned white. Here is the truth about boundaries that no one tells you. We are taught that setting boundaries is an aggressive act, a way of punishing the people around us. That is a lie designed by people who benefit from your lack of limits. Boundaries are simply a description of what you will and will not accept. Enforcing them is not cruelty, it is clarity. People who scream the loudest about loyalty and family have usually done the least to actually earn it. They use the concept of family as a shield to deflect accountability. When I watched Julian frantically try to blame me for finding his hidden life, I finally understood that you cannot reason with someone who actively benefits from misunderstanding. Leaving him quietly, legally, and permanently was the most powerful thing I could ever do. Julian, I want you out of this house tonight, I told him quietly, cutting through the loud, overlapping shouts of his parents. My lawyer filed the paperwork. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag before I call the police. He looked at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. The mask was gone. For 8 years, I had believed he was a fundamentally good man who occasionally made selfish choices. Now, looking at the deadness in his eyes, I realized he was a monster who occasionally performed good deeds. I thought walking him out that front door would be the end of it, but the social fallout over the next month was infinitely more vicious than I could have imagined. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong because a cornered narcissist, stripped of their narrative control, is the most dangerous version of themselves. Walking out of that living room felt like a definitive victory. But the next 72 hours taught me what victory actually costs when you are dismantling a carefully constructed illusion. Julian didn't retreat to a hotel to quietly reflect on his actions or hire a lawyer in dignified silence. He immediately launched a highly coordinated, vicious smear campaign. Within 48 hours, my phone was absolutely inundated with text messages and voicemails from our mutual friends, the wives of his corporate colleagues, and extended family members. Julian had woven a masterful, tragic tale of a stressed, devoted provider whose wife had finally snapped under the pressure of suburban life. He told everyone, with tears in his eyes, that I had illegally hacked his private business accounts, drained his legitimate consulting funds in a fit of paranoid delusion, and kicked him out of the house in front of his elderly, terrified parents. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scan the forged federal mortgage documents and post them directly to his LinkedIn profile. I wanted to call every single person who texted me with their condescending, pitying concern and lay out the undeniable, mathematically proven truth of his double life. But I didn't. I kept my voice steady and I kept my mouth shut, because engaging with a smear campaign is exactly what the abuser wants. It provides them with the chaotic, emotional energy they desperately need to fuel their victim narrative. Here is the absolute reality about going no contact. It is not a dramatic punishment. It is not a negotiation tactic. It is a strict medical decision. You are systematically excising a psychological malignancy from your life. The people who loudly demand that you explain yourself, who push you to be the bigger person, or who insist you keep it in the family, are almost always the ones who benefit far. Your continued subjugation. I blocked every single one of his flying monkeys. I changed my phone number. I locked down my social media profiles. I fortified the walls of my life and let them scream into the void. While Julian was busy playing the martyred husband in Chicago, his secret empire in Arizona was rapidly and violently collapsing. Evelyn, my ruthless attorney, had not been bluffing about the federal audit. When you anonymously report commercial mortgage fraud to a federal lending institution, the machinery of consequence moves slowly at first, but when it finally drops, it crushes absolutely everything in its path. Sarah, the mistress and the mother of his golden child, woke up later that same week to find the LLC's operational accounts entirely frozen. The massive pool of cash Julian had been routinely siphoning from my life insurance policy to pay her extravagant property taxes, her country club fees, and the upkeep of that $12,000 show pony was suddenly gone. She tried to call him, but he was drowning in the fallout of his own immediate crisis in Illinois. So she did what any panicked person used to living comfortably on someone else's dime would do. She tracked me down. It happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I was standing in the checkout line at a local grocery store, physically exhausted, trying to buy Leo's favorite brand of apple juice. My new, unlisted phone buzzed. It was an Arizona area code. I answered it without thinking, a stupid, split-second lapse in my usually rigid boundaries. The voice on the other end was hysterical. It was Sarah. She didn't call to apologize for participating in the destruction of my marriage. She called to aggressively demand her money. She screamed into the phone that I was destroying her innocent daughter's life, that Julian truly loved her and not me, and that I was a bitter, jealous wife illegally hoarding her rightful funds. The sheer, blinding audacity of this woman living in a luxury townhouse guaranteed by my blatantly forged signature, funded entirely by my stolen home equity, screaming at me while I stood in aisle 4 holding a plastic bottle of juice. My hand shook so badly I dropped my car keys on the linoleum floor. I couldn't breathe. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to hum loudly, and a wave of panic threatened to pull me under. I didn't say a single word. I ended the call. I permanently blocked the number. I picked up my keys, paid for my groceries with a trembling hand, and walked out to the parking lot. It wasn't a movie-perfect victory lap. I locked the doors of my car and cried for 20 solid minutes, overwhelmed by the grotesque unfairness of it all. But then I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and went back to dismantling them. The federal lender discovered the forged signature on the LLC documents within 2 weeks. They immediately called in the commercial loan on the Scottsdale townhouse. Sarah and her daughter were suddenly facing foreclosure and eviction. When the money completely stopped, so did Sarah's profound, undying love for Julian. She turned on him with the vicious ferocity of a starved animal. She filed for emergency child support in Arizona and publicly named him in a brutal civil suit for financial misrepresentation. Julian was suddenly fighting an unwinnable two-front war. He was facing a ruthless divorce in Illinois that was mathematically stripping him of all marital assets due to his proven financial fraud, and a federal investigation in Arizona had threatened his lucrative corporate career. Pharmaceutical supply chains do not employ executive consultants who are actively being investigated for federal loan fraud. He was abruptly placed on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave. The empire he had built on my back was in ashes, but the final, most satisfying blow didn't come from me or my lawyer. It came from the one person he thought he had completely under his control, his mother, Eleanor. Julian turned to his parents to bail him out. He needed a high-powered defense attorney for the federal case in Arizona and a shark for our divorce in Illinois. He gave them a watered-down, highly sanitized version of the truth, begging for a massive advance on his inheritance. He played the victim perfectly, crying in their living room, claiming I had ruthlessly set him up because I was jealous of his success and prone to paranoid delusions. But Evelyn, my lawyer, is not someone who leaves loose ends. She had legally subpoenaed Richard and Eleanor as character witnesses and financial stakeholders during the initial discovery phase of our divorce. During the official deposition, under oath and on the record, the full, unvarnished scope of Julian's deception was laid out on a heavy mahogany conference table. Every forged document, every stolen dollar, every timeline that proved he was vacationing with his mistress while his own father was in the hospital for heart surgery 3 years ago. The golden child illusion shattered violently. For 35 years, Julian had been the sun their universe orbited around. He was the impossible standard by which all other family members were judged and found wanting. Watching that break wasn't triumphant. It was profoundly tragic. They didn't just cut him off financially. They cut him off emotionally. Eleanor, who had once subtly criticized my parenting to elevate her son, looked at him across the deposition table with pure, unadulterated disgust. Without their money and their social protection, Julian was just a middle-aged man facing a federal indictment and a catastrophic divorce with absolutely zero leverage. The day the divorce was finalized, I thought I would feel an overwhelming sense of liberation. A cinematic moment of stepping out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine, ready to conquer the world. But the reality was entirely different and far less glamorous. It was pouring rain. The courthouse elevator was broken, so I had to walk down 6 flights of concrete stairs in uncomfortable heels. When I finally got to my car, I didn't pop champagne or call my friends cheering. I sat in the driver's seat, ate a stale granola bar I found in the glove compartment, and felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. That is the truth about surviving this kind of war. The victory doesn't feel like a party. It feels like the quiet after a devastating car crash. When you finally leave a situation like this, the hardest part isn't the legal battle. The hardest part is the silence of your new life and the heavy, suffocating emotions that come flooding in when you no longer have to survive day by day. You have to understand the critical difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is the feeling that you did something wrong. It is tied to an action. Shame is the deeply implanted lie that you are something wrong. Narcissists are absolute masters at manufacturing shame. They don't just blame you for their actions. They systematically condition you to believe that your inherent flaws are the reason they have to act the way they do. Julian didn't just cheat on me. He made me believe that my anxiety, my questions, my very presence, was a burden he was bravely tolerating. Unpacking that shame takes years of intentional work. You have to literally rewire your brain to realize that their cruelty was never a reflection of your worth, but a terrifying reflection of their own emptiness. And that brings me to the reality of trauma bonding, which is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of psychological abuse. People always ask, if it was so bad, why didn't you leave sooner? They think of abuse as a continuous, linear timeline of misery, but it isn't. A trauma bond is created by intermittent reinforcement. It is a biological addiction to the cycle of intense punishment followed by intense, performative affection. When Julian would tear me down, my nervous system would go into shock. And when he would suddenly apologize, buy me flowers, and hold me, my brain would flood with dopamine. You become literally addicted to the relief that your abuser provides from the very pain they caused. Breaking a trauma bond feels like going through physical withdrawal. It is brutal, it is agonizing, and it is why no contact is the absolute only way to survive. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. It has been 2 years since I slid that black binder across the coffee table. The federal investigation concluded with Julian pleading guilty to a lesser charge of corporate financial misconduct. He avoided prison, but his reputation is permanently destroyed. He works mid-level software sales now, living in a cramped apartment in a dreary suburb of Phoenix. Sarah left him the moment the Arizona house was foreclosed on, taking their daughter and moving out of state. I still live in the house I inherited from my parents. The mortgage is entirely clear. Leo is thriving, taking piano lessons and playing in the backyard without the heavy, anxious energy of his father looming over him. I didn't just survive Julian, I excised him entirely from the narrative of my life. I am not telling you this story because I want to be congratulated. I am telling you this because I know exactly what it feels like to sit in the dark, doubting your own sanity, wondering if you are going crazy. You aren't. Trust the knot in your stomach. Build your paper trail quietly. And when the time comes, do not negotiate with your abuser. Destroy the illusion permanently. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.